Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to show you my favorite way to run two amplifiers at the same time in the Line 6 Helix. And if you use my routing for doing this, you'll never have to worry about running out of DSP on the amplifiers. You can use any two amplifiers you want to mix and match and make your own custom new amplifier sound. So let's get to the Helix and see how to do it. So starting off with an empty preset here, I'm going to turn the noise gate on the input block. That's just where I like it. And the first thing I always do after that is to add a mono volume pedal right here at the beginning of the chain. Once in a while, a certain preset will need a special effect or a special sound, and I will move the volume pedal elsewhere. But the vast majority of my presets all have the volume pedal in this very first slot right here. Next thing I'm going to do, just for a quick audition, is I'm going to route the output of path 1 down to path 2. So you see it says path 2A here, it says none over here. It's very important that this says none on the input of path 2. Otherwise your preset will start to sound kind of funky. Let's add our first amp on this path here. You certainly should mix and match and experiment as much as you need to, but I'm going to throw on the matchless DC30 model, which is called Matchstick in the Helix, and I'm using channel 2. And by default, that comes out sounding like this. I'm going to deactivate that for a second here. On path 2, let's try throwing on a Marshall JTM 45. Let's try the bright channel here. By default, that sounds like this. Just going to throw a gain block on here, and I'm going to deactivate it, and I'm going to pull it down. This will now allow us to complete the routing. So let's take amp number 1, bring it down to path 1A. Then we're going to take the split block, move it all the way to the end. We're going to take the merge block and pull it down. On path 2, we're going to take the split block, bring it all the way back to the beginning, so you have two different inputs here. We're going to leave the merge block at the very end of the chain. Now up here, this says path 2A. This one from 1B, we need to change it to point at path 2B. Now you won't be able to do that until you have your second thing down here, your second input. So output of 1A goes to path 2A, output of 1B goes to path 2B. The input of 2A says none, but it has this arrow, which means it comes down from the top. The input of 2B also says none, but it has this arrow showing it comes down from the top. It's very important that these both say none. If they say anything else, you're going to get strange, weird, dry signals mixing in with your guitar tone. We don't want that. So this is now sort of the core of the routing. The top level concern it solves for us is the Helix has two DSP chips, digital signal processors. Path 1, A and B share one chip. Path 2A and B share the other chip. So what this means is we now have one chip dedicated to each amplifier, which means we're not ever going to run out of DSP on our amplifier choices. If you try to put 2 amps on path 1 or 2 amps on path 2, you'll be in much more danger of running out of horsepower and you won't be able to do it. So now that we have this here, we need to set up a couple of other things that are going to help me audition and balance this tone. So just before the amplifier number 1, I'm going to put on a mono gain block. And just before amplifier number 2, I'm going to put on another mono gain block. So I have a mono gain block before each of these. Now what I'm going to do with these is set up some automation. And that automation is going to be on this gain block that I have highlighted here. I'm going to assign it to foot switch number 1. If you use the 8-stomp mode, you probably will want to put it on foot switch number 2. But I'm going to make it so that the minimum value is -120, the maximum value is 0. When I do that, I'm also going to change the label. And for the purpose of this, I'm just going to write matchless DC30. And I like to change the color to red. For this other gain block here, I'm going to also set up some automation. I'm going to assign it to foot switch 7 because I use 10 stomp mode. If you use 8 stomp mode, you're going to want to set it to foot switch 8. And I'm going to do the same thing. Minimum value 120, maximum value is 0, and I'm going to rename it to be Marshall JTM 45, and I'm going to change the color to red. I like to have the colors of these two volume blocks as red because they are for switching on and off the amp blocks, and the amp blocks are red. So it's always nice to have the color matching up. And now I can control which amp I'm hearing based on the foot switches on the Helix. So when they're both off, you won't hear anything, of course. You just hear my guitar in the room here, the strings. So let's check out the matchless and the Marshall. And I can also now switch between them by stepping on both buttons at the same time. And the first thing I notice is the Marshall amp is quite a bit quieter than the matchless amp. So my next order of business will be to balance the volumes of these two amp models. Turn the Marshall up a little bit more here. Let's see how they sound now. So now that I have the two amplifiers at roughly the same volume, when I switch between them, I'm going to turn them both on at the same time. We'll be able to hear kind of what they sound like mixed together. So there are the two different amplifiers together. Sounds pretty dry, so we want to add more effects. But first I want to talk to you a little bit about these different paths and how this routing gets you set up to work. So the first thing is the entire line of path 1A up here. This is where you will put any kind of stomp boxes, pedals, distortions, compressors, anything like that that you want to go into the front end of both amplifier 1 and amplifier number 2. Next thing is right before amplifier 1 on path 1B here, this is where you'll put any kind of effects or pedals that you want to affect the input of only amplifier number 1. The first half of line 2A is where you put any of your pedals or effects that you want to affect only the input of amplifier number 2. The second half of path 1B is where you put any of the effects or pedals that you want to affect the output of amplifier number 1. And the second half of 2A is where you put any kind of effects that you want to affect the output of amplifier number 2. Now there's also this extra area on path 2B, and that entire line is also effects that come after amplifier number 1 because of the routing down to 2B here. You can move this merge block around if you need something to affect the output of both amplifiers. You can move this merge block back and it'll give you a bonus little area here that you can put things, but I almost never do that. One thing I want to do is take care of how dry this tone is sounding right now, and it is sounding pretty dry. So what I want to do is add some reverbs to it. So let's focus first on amplifier number 1. So I'm hitting my foot switch that turns off the Marshall, so we have only the matchless here is the only one turned on. I always like my reverbs very last in the chain. You don't have to, it's just where I like mine. So my very last thing I'm going to put here is a plate reverb. Now remember, this bottom path is completely after amp number 1. So I put my plate reverb on, and I have the Marshall turned off, so just the matchless with the plate reverb on default settings sounds like this. So that's quite a long decay. I'm going to just turn it down a little bit here just to make things a little better. So that's a little bit more realistic. Normally you would totally tweak these reverbs and stuff in, but I'm just showing you the routing as the focus of this video, so do what you need to do there. So let's turn our attention over to the Marshall amplifier. So I turned off the matchless and I turned on the Marshall. Again, that's using the foot switches that are mapped to these two gain blocks. And here I am going to put on a room reverb. And let's hear how that sounds. This is the Marshall alone with a room reverb. Cool, so that's a pretty lively sounding reverb. So let's hear those together for a second. Sounding pretty good. You may have noticed when I was adding and auditioning the amps originally that the Matchless is a fairly mid-focused amplifier with a lot of cut in that range and a little bit of a darker quality to it, while the Marshall JTM45, as the name implies, I'm using the bright channel, and it is an amplifier model in the Helix that has quite a bit more high-end bite to it. So this is something that I will often like to do, and this is the power of using dual amplifiers, is you can mix the characters of two different amplifiers together. So on one channel, I have a real mid-range cut, and on the other channel, I have a top-end bite. And those two things can combine together to make up for the deficiencies in either amp. A lot of times you might think the Matchless DC30, you love the mid-range character to it and the way it cuts, but you wish it had more top end. And a lot of times the reaction will be to try to tweak the EQ of the amplifier to add more presence or treble, or you might try to add an EQ circuit to it or an EQ block on the Helix. And those solutions are fine if they work for you. But for me, rather than trying to adjust the character of the amplifier, I prefer mixing and matching multiple amplifiers to create a new sound that people may have never heard before. And I find it to be a lot more natural than trying to bend a single amplifier to a particular tone. So that also then affects my reverbs here. I like to put a different reverb on each amplifier. I chose a plate reverb for the Matchless. The plate reverb tends to be a fairly natural sounding decay, while the room reverb tends to allow the bright character of the JTM45 to sound like it's bouncing around inside a bathroom or something like that. So the reverb chosen for the Marshall accentuates the character of that amplifier by allowing that top end to be preserved in the reverberations, while the reverb chosen for the Matchless allows that mid-range to still shine through without trying to add any other new characters to the amplifier. So the next thing that I will commonly do is add another couple of volume blocks after each of these amplifiers. So I can move this one up here now. I don't need it down here anymore because the reverb will hold that path in place. And then I'm also going to add a volume block just after the Matchless. Now what these volume blocks are going to be for is as I set up different snapshots, I may find that the different snapshots need the amplifiers to be at a different volume. And I'll show you an example of what that might be like. So let's add on my top row here a drive pedal. And I'm going to add the compulsive drive. With my compulsive drive on there, let's hear the difference in sound when it's turned off versus when it's turned on. So with it off, it sounds like this. And on. Let's hear that again, and I'll just toggle it while I play. So you can hear that it gets quite a bit louder when I kick on that drive pedal. Now that might be what you want. Sometimes that's exactly why you added the drive pedal in to begin with. But in a lot of cases for me, I want to have all my snapshots and configurations be at the same level. So if we're in that situation here, what I need to do is set up a couple of snapshots with that pedal being on and off. So let's get a snapshot going here. Snapshot 1. Let's just call this less drive. Then snapshot 2. Let's call this more drive. So on each of these 2 gain blocks, I'm going to set them up so that snapshot number 2 has negative 3 dB on the gain, and let's hear if that had the effect that we were looking for. So I'll start off with the less gain and switch to the snapshot for the more gain and kind of go back and forth. Sounds like I dropped it by too much. So instead of us going down by 3 dB, let's change that to about 1.5 dB. So now let's hear how we're doing with more and less gain. So that's a lot more balanced. You can certainly play with it more so that it's right for your situation, whatever you're using for your effects up here and stuff like that. But for me, there's a lot of ways you could do this, like adjusting the channel volume of each amplifier per snapshot. I prefer adding these extra gain blocks and doing it with those because it means the core balance that I set up between these 2 amplifiers remains consistent, such that if I decide I want to redo this preset to be for a different song with totally different snapshots, I don't have to figure out those balances again or figure out which snapshot has the core balance. The configuration of these 2 amplifiers remains consistent always, and I can copy it to any preset, and those amplifiers will be still balanced with each other. So I use these 2 gain blocks to balance the volumes of my snapshots. I also put them directly after the amplifiers so that they don't affect the sound of the reverbs, for instance. So some people also like to balance their snapshots using the volume control on the output block here, and that's fine if it fits your situation. But for me, I don't want my reverb trails to change volume when the output changes volume. So I use these 2 gain blocks in the middle here. So one other thing that I will typically do is to have a little bit of delay in the front of the amplifiers, but I don't like to put the delay on both amplifiers. I'll usually put it on only one of them. So typically I will like to have my pre-delay in front of the darker, more mid-rangey amp that cuts through so that the high end of the other amplifier does not build up and cause extra harshness. So I'll throw on my favorite delay here, which is the Adriatic delay. It's a modified Boss DM2 with some extra tweaks to make it a little bit cooler. So let's throw that on there and see how that sounds. Now I always turn the modulation off because I'm not a big fan of modulation on delay in the general sense, but it can be useful in certain circumstances. I'm going to turn the feedback all the way down. Leave the time at a couple hundred milliseconds here, something like that, and turn down the mix a little bit. So let's hear what that sounds like. It's cool. I think it's getting pretty spacious. Of course, you can adjust all these things, whatever fits good for you. Throw some high cuts, throw some low cuts on these amps and cabs and stuff like that. Again, I brought everything up with almost complete default settings here, just because this video was not about getting a particular tone. It's just about how to do this routing. So key components of this routing, remember, path 1B has the first amplifier, path 2A has the second amplifier, so your amps are on different DSP chips here, not competing with each other. I got my volume pedal at the beginning of the chain. I've got these 2 gain blocks, which control muting each of the 2 amplifiers. I've got these 2 gain blocks, which control the balance of the amplifiers on snapshots. I've got 2 different reverbs on each of the amps at the very end of my chain. Got a delay block going to the input of just one of the amps. I've got an extra distortion boost that can go into the 2 amps. But of course, all that stuff is variable. Throw in whatever works for you. There it is. I hope you all enjoyed my explanation of the Vesco routing for using 2 amplifiers at the same time in the Line 6 Helix. You don't have to worry about running out of DSP on your amplifier choices. So stop by my Facebook page, link in the description down here, put a like on it, subscribe to it so you can see updates from me, subscribe to my YouTube channel here so you don't miss any of my videos, and of course, come hang out with us on Facebook in the Line 6 Helix User Group Original, where there's thousands of people sharing Helix tips and tricks and answering each other's questions every single day. Until the next video, I will see all of you next time.